My name is Anna Miller, and at 28 years old, I never imagined I would be so embarrassed in my life as I was at that Christmas dinner. The memory, sharp and cold, still stings, even now, weeks later, with the lingering scent of pine and roast permeating the deepest corners of my mind. It wasn't just a fleeting moment of discomfort. It was a profound public assault on my very being, orchestrated with a cruel precision that could only come from years of practice. In front of the whole family, a glittering tableau of wealth and feigned affection, my in-laws, Mr. Allister and Mrs. Victoria Sterling, called me worthless and poor. They didn't just imply it. They uttered the words, their voices dripping with contempt. Then they laughed at me, a low, collective chortle that echoed through their opulent hall as if I were a mere peasant, a dead weight in their son's illustrious life, an unfortunate, laughable stain on their pristine lineage. Little did they know, as they savored their fleeting moment of superiority, that that very night, shrouded beneath layers of festive cheer and aristocratic pretense, their biggest, most meticulously guarded secret would be violently ripped open and revealed to everyone, to their entire curated social circle. The humiliation they had so carefully, so maliciously orchestrated for me would backfire on them with a devastating, unimaginable force, a force from which they would never truly recover, never entirely escape, no matter how desperately they tried to hide the brutal truth or frantically rewrite their own tarnished history. That night, seemingly ordinary, Christmas, a time for joy and forgiveness, would instead become a terrifying point of no return for them, a ruthless, unforgiving mirror that would unflinchingly show them the grotesque ugliness of their own souls, stripping away, layer by painful layer, the immaculate, flawless facade they had so painstakingly, so meticulously constructed over decades. If you're new here and you find yourself intrigued by tales of resilience, justice, and the unexpected twists of fate, subscribe to the channel and make sure you hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single story. I have always been a person of simple principles, deeply rooted in the soil of honesty and hard work, but always with a big heart and an unshakable work ethic that I consider my true inheritance. My upbringing, far removed from the gilded cages of the sterling world, was steeped in the kind of honest labor that built foundations, not fleeting empires of speculative wealth. It was a childhood shaped by the tangible results of dedication, where every effort visibly contributed to our well-being and the warmth of our home. My father, Robert Miller, was a sturdy, quiet man. His hands, though calloused and worn from years of shaping stubborn wood, were surprisingly gentle, capable of intricate, delicate work. He taught me not just the practical skills of craftsmanship, but also the profound art of patience and the deep, abiding satisfaction that comes from a job meticulously and lovingly well done. His small carpentry workshop, tucked away in the back of our modest backyard, was more than just a place of work. It was a sanctuary of creation, a haven filled with the sweet, nostalgic scent of freshly cut sawdust, mingling with the earthy aroma of timber and punctuated by the rhythmic, soothing hum of saws and the precise tap-tap-tap of his hammer. I'd often sit there as a wide-eyed child, perched on an overturned bucket, mesmerized, watching him, silent, as he transformed rough, unyielding timber into elegant, functional furniture, a sturdy dining table that would host countless family meals, a delicate rocking chair for a new baby, a finely crafted bookshelf that would soon groan under the weight of beloved stories. From him, I learned that true, enduring value lay not in superficial shine or fleeting trends, but in the integrity of craftsmanship, the hidden strength of the joints, and the unyielding honesty of the materials. My mother, Eleanor Miller, the other hand, was a skilled seamstress, her nimble fingers a blur of motion as they guided fabric beneath the whirring needle of her old Singer machine. She possessed an uncanny ability to turn a simple piece of fabric, be it humble cotton or shimmering silk, into a masterpiece of design, a garment imbued with both practicality and understated beauty. She instilled in me the crucial importance of meticulous attention to detail, the careful measurement, the precise cut, and the profound dignity that inherently comes from providing quality, from creating something with care and precision. She didn't just mend clothes for our neighbors. She wove care, love, and a quiet sense of pride into every single stitch, teaching me that true beauty could be found not just in grandiosity, but in practicality, in resilience, and in the enduring strength of a well-made thing. Together they, my pillars of strength and wisdom, taught me from a very tender age the invaluable, immeasurable worth of every penny earned honestly, every single dedicated effort, and every single step taken with unwavering dignity. Their lessons were my foundation, stronger than any inherited fortune. I grew up in a modest house, a humble bungalow, yes, on the quieter, less affluent outskirts of the city, nestled within a close-knit neighborhood where front doors were rarely, if ever, locked, and where neighbors shared not just the physical boundaries of fences, but also the intangible richness of stories, laughter, and a comforting sense of community, readily offering a cup of sugar or a helping hand without a second thought. It wasn't a grand estate, no sprawling lawns or towering gates, but it was, unequivocally, a home overflowing with genuine warmth, infused with the comforting aroma of fresh coffee brewing every morning, a sacred ritual that still grounds me, connecting me to my roots. It was filled with a cozy silence that was occasionally interrupted by the distant, joyful laughter of children playing freely in the street, or the gentle, soothing rustle of leaves in our small, meticulously tended garden. My mother's vibrant flower beds, bursting with riotous hydrangeas, fragrant roses, and cheerful marigolds, were more than just a display of natural beauty. They were a living, breathing testament to her nurturing spirit, a brilliant splash of color against the practical, often demanding, backdrop of our everyday lives. My childhood was certainly devoid of material luxuries. There were no extravagant, globe-trotting vacations, no designer toys, no private tutors, but it was incredibly rich in profound life lessons, in boisterous laughter shared around our humble, yet always full dinner table, in whispered bedtime stories that painted vivid, imaginative worlds in my young mind, and most importantly, in the comforting, unwavering certainty that I would always, always have a safe harbor to return to, a place where I was unconditionally loved, profoundly accepted, and where I truly, unequivocally belonged. This sense of belonging, this deep-seated security, was a treasure beyond measure. There were no expensive jewels or designer clothes hanging in my modest wardrobe, no glossy fashion magazines dictating my choices. The latest, fleeting fashion trends were never a priority, nor did they hold any allure for me. Instead, my sanctuary was filled with books, countless books, piled high in every available corner of my small bedroom, each worn spine a silent promise of a new adventure, a journey into a different world, a gateway to knowledge and empathy. Dreams, both grand and intimately personal, were meticulously written down in old, well-loved notebooks, chronicling my aspirations, my reflections, and the quiet, determined plans for my future. I harbored the quiet, yet fierce ambition to build my own life, brick by painstaking brick, entirely by my own means, owing absolutely nothing to anyone, forging a unique path defined solely by my own efforts, my own choices, and my own unwavering integrity. My first apartment, a small but charming refuge nestled in a bustling, eclectic neighborhood a short bus ride from my childhood home, was a profound testament to years of disciplined saving and countless hours of diligent overtime. At my demanding publishing job, it wasn't lavish, it wasn't grand, but it was mine, a deeply personal space filled with carefully chosen second-hand treasures, vintage finds, and the quiet, echoing contentment of self-sufficiency. Every single piece of furniture, lovingly, restored with my father's tools or carefully chosen from flea markets, every beloved book on my sturdy shelf, every mismatched teacup in my cozy kitchen, had a story, a memory, an effort, a small triumph behind it. This slow, deliberate accumulation of small, meaningful things, each imbued with personal history, filled me with a quiet, unshakable pride that no amount of inherited wealth, no fleeting display of material extravagance could ever possibly buy. It was my sacred space, my meticulously constructed fortress of hard-won independence, and with every decisive turn of the key in the lock, I felt the sweet, tangible sensation of self-made security. A deep peace that only true autonomy can bring. Our first dates were always meticulously discreet, almost clandestine. We would slip away to quaint, unassuming cafes tucked away on quiet side streets, hidden gems known only to locals, or spend hours strolling through bustling public parks. Hand in hand, observing the simple beauty of everyday life, or lose ourselves in evening movie screenings far removed from the curious, judgmental eyes of high society. I felt an unparalleled sense of ease and authenticity with him. There was no pressure to impress, no underlying current of judgment, no need to perform or pretend. He listened to me with a genuine, unwavering attention that I rarely encountered, asking thoughtful questions that showed he truly heard my words, and truly absorbing everything I said, not just waiting for his turn to speak. In turn, he spoke of his own profound anxieties and deep-seated frustrations with a raw, touching sincerity, revealing the heavy burden of his family's expectations, the constant pressure to conform, the loneliness of his gilded cage. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the seemingly insurmountable social barrier that initially separated us began to dissolve, replaced by a rare and precious complicity, a bond that felt stronger precisely because it was built away from the glare of his family's scrutiny. Our conversations effortlessly stretched for hours, delving into everything from the profound insights of literary classics to the mundane dilemmas of everyday life, all explored with a depth and honesty that was intoxicating, a stark contrast to the superficiality he was accustomed to. I found myself, for the very first time, openly sharing the intimate details of my simple life, my quiet struggles, and my heartfelt joys, with someone who didn't look at me with pity or thinly veiled disdain, but with a profound and true interest that validated my very being, making me feel seen and cherished. When we eventually decided to get married, after 2 years of a loving, growing relationship, the reaction from his parents, Mr. Alastair and Mrs. Victoria Sterling, was precisely as I had grimly predicted, if not even worse than my worst fears. There was no joyful celebration, no grand engagement party, no enthusiastic speeches overflowing with well wishes. Instead, there was a chilling, protracted silence, a coldness that seeped into every conversation, immediately followed by a relentless series of questions, thinly veiled interrogations, disguised as concerns about who I was, where I came from, and more importantly, what I brought to the family. To them, marriage was not a sacred union of hearts, but a cold, calculated transaction, a strategic merger of bloodlines and fortunes, an opportunity to further consolidate power and wealth. My presence, my very existence, was an outright affront, a glaring blemish on their meticulously crafted, impeccably maintained social resume, a discordant, unwelcome piece that simply refused to fit into the intricate, prearranged puzzle they had so carefully assembled for their son's future. I was an anomaly, a threat to their carefully constructed order. Lucas, despite the immense, suffocating pressure from his parents, defended our choice with a quiet bravery that touched me to my core. He articulated his feelings about love, about his own happiness, about the fundamental importance of building one's own life according to one's own values, not merely inherited ones. He spoke of our shared dreams, of the genuine connection we had, of a future he envisioned with me that was built on mutual respect, not societal expectations. But his parents were like immovable stone walls, impenetrable to any argument that didn't align with their rigidly elitist and deeply materialistic worldview. My mother-in-law, Mrs. Victoria Sterling, a woman whose perfectly coiffed blonde hair and sparkling, oversized jewels seemed to constantly compete for attention and adoration, possessed an intimidatingly icy gaze that could freeze a lesser person in their tracks. "Lucas, my son," she would say, her voice laced with a condescending pity. "You are so incredibly naive. You have always been far too soft, far too idealistic. This girl," she would often refer to me simply as "this girl" or "her," pointedly, looking at me as she spoke, as if I were merely an inanimate object, an inconvenient truth she wished to erase from existence. A girl without pedigree, without connections. What do you truly expect from her? That she helps you expand your businesses? That she introduces you to the right social circles? She brings absolutely nothing of substance, nothing of value to this family name, to our legacy. She will only drag you down, Lucas. Mark my words. There was never a single word of genuine support, never a warm gesture of affection from them directed towards me. Instead, every interaction was meticulously peppered with passive-aggressive comments, each one a subtle, insidious jab about my modest origins, my perceived lack of networking opportunities, as if my publishing contacts were somehow inferior to their financial ones or my humble apartment, which they, with a distinct tone of thinly veiled contempt, would refer to as quaint or charming in its simplicity, always delivered with an underlying smirk that revealed their true intent, a backhanded compliment disguised as a cutting criticism designed to make me feel small and out of place. I distinctly recall one particularly excruciating Sunday lunch where Mrs. Sterling, with an affected, overly sweet smile that didn't quite reach her cold eyes, asked in a voice loud enough for several relatives to overhear, "Anna, my dear, do you still use those supermarket coupons? I thought after marrying Lucas, a Sterling, you wouldn't need to worry about such mundane things anymore. Surely Lucas can provide for you now, so you can leave those little habits behind." I felt the familiar sting, a sharp pain in my chest, a flush of heat creeping up my neck, but I maintained my composure, forcing a polite smile as I calmly replied that yes, I did indeed use them, not out of necessity, but because frugality, personal economy, and environmental awareness were deeply held values that I cherished, values instilled in me by my parents. Her response was a stifled giggle, exchanged conspiratorially with one of her equally snobbish sisters, their eyes glinting with amusement at my expense, enjoying my discomfort as if it were a finely orchestrated performance. I always tried diligently to ignore their thinly veiled insults, choosing instead to focus intently on the steadfast, resilient love Lucas and I were meticulously building, on the undeniable solidity of our relationship, which, despite all their relentless efforts to undermine it, only seemed to strengthen in the face of such adversity. It was as if their negativity forged us closer, proving the strength of our bond. Lucas, in turn, tried tirelessly to protect me, confronting his parents with a diplomatic patience that often bordered on saintly, attempting to mediate, to reason, to soften the blows directed at me. But the stark truth was that Mr. and Mrs. Sterling remained utterly uncompromising, their minds firmly closed to anything that challenged their rigid worldview. To them, I was unequivocally dead weight, an unmovable anchor actively pulling Lucas down, preventing him from achieving what they arrogantly considered his true potential, which of course meant becoming as cold, calculating, and ruthlessly ambitious as they were, a carbon copy of themselves. With each obligatory family gathering, the oppressive tension in the air visibly escalated, thickening like a heavy, suffocating fog. I exerted my utmost effort to be polite, to be agreeable, to simply fit in, to become invisible even, but it was always a futile endeavor. They didn't genuinely want me to fit in. They quite clearly wanted me to simply vanish, to disappear from their pristine landscape. Mr. Alistair Sterling, resplendent in his impeccably tailored suit and wearing his perpetually arrogant smile that rarely, if ever, reached his cold, calculating eyes, invariably had a meticulously crafted story about how he had started from absolutely nothing and, single-handedly, built his formidable empire. These tales always carried a thinly veiled implication that I somehow lacked the same moral fiber, the same relentless ambition, or the same inherent worthiness, the unspoken message being that my modest background was a reflection of my inherent deficiency. The undeniable truth, which I knew thanks to Lucy Watson, was that he had always started with a considerable inheritance, a substantial head start, a silver spoon in his mouth. But the carefully curated narrative he relentlessly sold was of a self-made man, a myth designed purely to bolster his inflated ego, which only served to heighten my internal irritation, as I was fully aware it was nothing more than a carefully constructed farce. They perceived me as a direct threat to their meticulously maintained image of perfection, perhaps because I was the living, breathing personification of the very simplicity and authenticity they so fiercely despised. At the same time, I represented something their son had chosen independently, a choice that openly defied their deeply entrenched values and societal expectations. I, Anna Miller, was an uncomfortable, ever-present reminder of everything they had desperately tried to erase from their own humble origins, a constant, nagging whisper that they hadn't always been so superior and unblemished. It was this deep-seated insecurity, masked by their arrogance, that fueled their animosity towards me. Christmas, for them, was far more than a heartfelt celebration of family unity. It was an annual, lavish display of status, a carefully orchestrated pageant of wealth and influence. It was the designated time when the entire Sterling clan gathered, not to bond in genuine affection, but to ostentatiously parade their latest acquisitions, their shimmering jewels, their exotic travels to far-flung locales, and their gleaming luxury cars. The Sterling mansion itself, an imposing, sprawling edifice situated in the city's most exclusive and coveted neighborhood, was a spectacle in itself, meticulously decorated with a level of luxury that bordered on outright ostentation, an almost vulgar display of excess. Towering Christmas trees, adorned with delicate crystal ornaments and thousands of twinkling lights that seemed to compete with the stars outside, competed for attention with extravagant floral arrangements, each bloom perfect and precisely placed, and ancient, priceless Persian rugs that covered every inch of the polished floors. The tables groaned under the weight of fine porcelain dishes, gleaming silver cutlery, and exquisitely cut crystal glasses, all meticulously arranged on intricately embroidered linen tablecloths, each detail screaming expense and exclusivity. Every single detail, from the grand entrance to the smallest decorative flourish on the mantel, was precisely engineered to impress, to dazzle, and to unequivocally reaffirm the family's immense power and boundless wealth, a stage set for their annual performance. And annually, I, Anna Miller, was the silently acknowledged, utterly unwelcome guest who, in their haughty minds, inevitably marred the pristine image of perfection they worked so tirelessly to maintain. I always felt like an awkward, out-of-place element, akin to a cheap hat pin awkwardly stuck onto a silken, haute couture gown, a discordant note in their symphony of superiority. That particular year, the anticipation for Christmas was even more, heavily laden with an almost palpable tension, a foreboding hum in the air that settled deep in my bones. I could already sense that something was fundamentally different, that their already thin patience with me had finally worn completely through, reaching its breaking point like a stretched elastic band about to snap. Just the week before, Mrs. Sterling had called me an occurrence rare enough to signal alarm. As she usually communicated through Lucas or her personal assistant, her tone of voice bordering on outright condescension, a chilling sweetness that made my skin crawl. "Anna, dear," she had purred, each word laced with a saccharine sweetness that made my teeth ache, a superficial charm that masked a deeper malice. "I sincerely hope you dress appropriately for the Christmas dinner. We will have exceedingly important guests this year, individuals of significant influence and impeccable taste, and we certainly wouldn't want you to feel out of place, or, worse yet, to cast a poor impression on the esteemed company. Your presence reflects on us, you understand. The insinuation was abundantly clear, delivered with surgical precision. My simple, understated elegance, meticulously chosen from my modest wardrobe, was simply not sufficient for her impossibly high, superficial standards. I was being warned not to embarrass them. Lucas, perceiving my growing irritation and the slight tremor in my voice as I recounted the call, had tried to calm me, his own voice gentle, reminding me that his unwavering love was the only thing that truly mattered, not his parents' cruel, fleeting approval. But with each passing year, this annual ordeal, this ritual of social torture, became exponentially more difficult, chipping away at my resolve, eroding my reserves of patience and forgiveness. Despite the mounting dread and the churning knot in my stomach, a persistent pit of anxiety that never truly left me on these occasions, I meticulously prepared myself. I selected a simple yet undeniably elegant dress in a subdued, calming jewel tone, a garment I had purchased during a rare, fortunate sale after much careful planning and saving a small victory for my disciplined budget. I possessed no dazzling, oversized jewels to compete with Mrs. Sterling's ostentatious, blinding collection, but my single, cherished silver bracelet, a precious heirloom gifted by my beloved grandmother years ago, gleamed softly on my wrist, shining not with monetary value, but with the profound, undeniable affection of a true and heartfelt story, a piece of genuine connection in a world of manufactured glamour. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, my own eyes meeting mine, taking a deep, fortifying breath, bracing myself for the evening ahead. I reminded myself, with unwavering conviction, that my worth was not defined by what I wore, or by the expensive brands I could not afford, or by the judgment of others, but by who I fundamentally was, a woman of integrity, kindness, and strength. I had my intrinsic dignity, a core strength forged through hardship and honesty, and I swore to myself that absolutely no one, not even the imperious Sterlings, with all their wealth and influence, could ever strip that away from me. I stepped into the car with Lucas, the knot in my stomach tightening with each passing block, but my resolve solidified. I was determined to endure just one more night, just one more round of their petty little jabs and contemptuous looks. Little did I know, however, that this night would not just be different. It would be utterly transformative. This, unbeknownst to them, would be the night the masks would finally fall, and crucially, they wouldn't be mine. The grand stage was now meticulously set, the unwitting actors were all in their assigned places, and the true, unforgettable show was about to explosively begin. The air was charged, a silent hum of anticipation, though only I truly understood its ominous significance. I deliberately sat back down beside Lucas, the soft, plush velvet of the chair a stark contrast to the hardened resolve now setting in. My bones. My hand, still clasped firmly in his beneath the table, felt the comforting, silent pressure of his concern. "Are you okay?" he whispered again, his voice barely audible above the renewed din of polite chatter, but laden with genuine worry. He searched my eyes, trying to decipher the unreadable expression that, to him, must have seemed like a strained calm. He, of course, remained utterly unaware of the decisive actions I had just taken in the opulent, gilded restroom, completely oblivious to the impending cataclysm I was about to unleash. I merely nodded, offering a faint, almost imperceptible smile, a brittle facade for the tempest raging within. The outward calm he perceived was, in truth, the unnerving stillness preceding an imminent, destructive storm, the quiet, chilling resolution of an irrevocable decision that had just cemented itself in the very core of my being. This pivotal moment was no longer about me, about my personal shame or suffering. It had transcended into something far grander, far more encompassing. It was about the raw, unvarnished truth about the absolute necessity of justice, and about ruthlessly unmasking the ingrained, pervasive hypocrisy that had permeated every single luxurious inch of that sprawling mansion for decades. The time for my passive submission, for my quiet endurance, had finally, definitively, come to an end. The pieces of this treacherous game were poised to be dramatically overturned, and this time I, Anna Miller, held the indisputable trump card, the damning evidence they would never, in their wildest, most arrogant dreams, have imagined I possessed. Christmas Eve was far from over. In fact, the real, unforgettable show was about to explosively begin. My mind, though seemingly composed on the surface, was racing with a clarity that felt almost supernatural. The earlier haze of raw pain and simmering anger had completely dissipated, replaced by a crystalline focus, a sharp, almost terrifying precision. I had the undeniable proof now, nestled securely within my phone, the digital files sent by Lucy Watson. They were the meticulously falsified balance sheets, the intricate records of shadowy shell companies, and even incriminating emails that laid bare Mr. Sterling's elaborate scheme to illicitly divert funds. These weren't just vague accusations. They were hard, undeniable facts capable of tearing down the entire edifice of their public image, brick by brick. But even with this formidable arsenal, I still felt I needed more. I needed something that would strike Mrs. Sterling with the same brutal intensity her husband was about to face, something that would dismantle her carefully constructed persona of moral superiority, leaving her as exposed and vulnerable as he would be. And then, a second memory, a piece of gossip I had overheard months ago, surfaced with startling clarity. It was a hushed rumor, circulating discreetly in the exclusive circles of high society, that I had caught from a chatty hairdresser who worked for a wealthy friend of Clara Sterling. The whisper was that Mrs. Victoria Sterling had been engaged in a long-standing extramarital affair spanning several years with none other than her husband's younger business partner, Mr. Graham Davies. This man, a handsome, polished figure, his charm as superficial as his expensive suits, had not only frequented the Sterling mansion at all their lavish parties, his presence a constant, almost unsettling fixture, but was, in fact, seated conspicuously at the dinner table that very night, just a few seats down from us, attempting to blend into the background. No one, of course, dared to speak of it openly, fearing the Sterling's wrath, the social repercussions that would inevitably follow such a transgression. But the subtle, knowing glances and hushed whispers among the older, more observant guests had always been telltale signs, tiny cracks in the facade that I, with my editor's eye for detail, had easily picked up on. I had the pieces now, not just for Mr. Sterling, the architect of their financial deceit, but for Mrs. Sterling too, the self-proclaimed paragon of virtue. All I needed to do was meticulously assemble them and present them to this captive audience in a way that no one could possibly deny, a public exposé so undeniable that no one could pretend they hadn't heard, or more importantly, seen it with their own shocked eyes. The stage was set for a dual downfall. The atmosphere at the table was a suffocating blend of forced cheer and simmering discomfort, a thin veneer of festivity barely concealing the underlying tension. The conversation, meticulously controlled by Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, revolved around their latest triumphs, their recent acquisition of a sprawling vineyard in Tuscany, Mrs. Sterling's successful chairmanship of an impossibly exclusive charity, Ball, Mr. Sterling's shrewd maneuvering in a complex real estate deal. Mrs. Sterling, basking in her self-importance, had just finished recounting a meticulously embellished tale of a charitable gala she had single-handedly hosted, emphasizing her philanthropic spirit and her unwavering commitment to the community. Her voice, dripping with false humility, concluded, "It's simply our duty, isn't it, as those blessed with means, to give back, to uphold the values that truly matter, to set an example for others." She scanned the table, her eyes pausing on mine for an extra beat, a silent challenge in her icy gaze, a blatant invitation for me to acknowledge my own perceived inferiority. Some people, of course, she added, her voice dropping subtly but audibly, don't understand the depth of such responsibilities, the true meaning of legacy, the sacrifices required to maintain one's position. A few obedient nods and murmurs of agreement from her inner circle of sycophantic relatives and social climbers followed, their collective complicity a sickening chorus. Mr. Sterling, ever the master of veiled insults and self-aggrandizement, then chimed in, his voice booming. With practiced authority, indeed, Victoria, true value isn't just about what you accumulate, it's about how you acquire it and how you uphold your name. A name like Sterling isn't built on flimsy foundations, on fleeting fads, but on generations of integrity and shrewd ethical decisions, on a spotless reputation. He puffed out his chest slightly, adjusting the silk handkerchief in his breast pocket, his eyes sweeping across the room, demanding silent applause, a tacit acknowledgement of his supposed moral fortitude. His gaze, too, lingered on me, a deliberate, calculated barb designed to twist the knife of my perceived inadequacy, to remind me of my humble origins. Lucas, sensing my deepening stillness, my rigid posture, squeezed my hand once more under the table, his fingers tracing a small, reassuring circle on my skin, a silent plea for calm, a desperate hope that I would simply endure this final barrage of insults and veiled threats. But his pleas, his hopes, were already too late. The dam had broken, the floodgates of my patience had burst. The point of no return had been crossed. Mrs. Sterling, in what was to be her final, self-congratulatory act of the evening, her swan song of hypocrisy, decided it was time for another toast. She rose gracefully from her seat, her movements fluid and practiced, honed by years of formal etiquette classes, her figure perfectly framed by the glittering, impossibly tall Christmas tree behind her, a sparkling backdrop to her impending demise. Her voice, high-pitched and resonant, filled the room, exuding an almost unbearable air of absolute self-confidence, of unquestionable authority, like a queen surveying her loyal subjects from her diamond-encrusted throne. Her eyes, shimmering with an almost triumphant disdain, swept across the table, meticulously collecting the forced admiration and palpable fear from her assembled guests, until they finally, decisively, stopped on me, fixing me with a sneering smile that seemed to seal what she believed was my ultimate irreversible fate, my permanent banishment to the realm of the insignificant. I would like to propose a final, heartfelt toast to this truly wonderful family, she began, her magnificent crystal glass tinkling delicately in her perfectly manicured hand, its soft, resonant sound effortlessly capturing the attention of every single person present, drawing all eyes to her. To our enduring values, to our absolutely unwavering ethics, and to the unparalleled success that we have meticulously built with so much personal sacrifice, unyielding honesty, and relentless hard work. May this glorious Christmas evening serve as a powerful reminder of what it genuinely means to be a true family, a family imbued with profound dignity, a truly honorable legacy to meticulously uphold, and an inspiring example to diligently follow for all future generations. She then stared directly at me again, her gaze unwavering, a clear, silent challenge, a final, unsaid declaration. You, Anna Miller, will never be a part of this sacred inner circle, this hallowed lineage. You are fundamentally unworthy. A profound, chilling stillness descended upon the room. Those words, dignity, unwavering ethics, honesty, and a legacy to honor, reverberated in the sudden quiet, a series of hypocritical pronouncements that struck me with the force of a physical blow, a literal punch to my gut. The crystal glass in my hands, a delicate, almost fragile thing, seemed to spontaneously shatter from within, not physically, but symbolically, its invisible shards piercing my deepest sense of fairness, igniting a fury that had long been suppressed. I simply couldn't take it anymore. There was no longer any room whatsoever for lingering hesitation, for paralyzing fear, for the meek, conciliatory Anna I had once been. That version of me had died 1,000 deaths over 1,000 insults. I rose slowly, deliberately, from my seat, my movements precise and unhurried. The heavy, ornate chair scraped harshly against the polished marble floor with a sudden, jarring sound that for a jarring instant caused every single eye in the vast, silent hall to pivot sharply and stare directly at me, a collective gasp rippling through the room. The silence that instantly followed was almost deafening, broken only by the frantic, powerful rhythm of my own heart, hammering a relentless war drum against my ribs, each beat a declaration of defiance. Lucas, beside me, looked up, startled, his hand instinctively extended towards me as if to pull me back down, to quell the impending storm, his face a mask of confusion and alarm. My in-laws, Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, their faces contorted with expressions of pure, unadulterated irritation and incredulity, stared at me as if I were a terrifying apparition. A ghost from their past returned to haunt them, an unexpected, unwelcome specter in their perfect Christmas tableau. "Excuse me," I said, my voice, to my own surprise, remarkably calm, a deceptive steadiness, although a subtle, almost imperceptible tremor ran through its core, a testament to the adrenaline surging through my veins. It was the calm before the storm, the deceptive quiet before the thunderclap. Before we raise our glasses in a final, resounding toast to the supposed dignity and legacy of the illustrious Sterling family, I feel it is my undeniable duty to add a small, yet profoundly significant detail to this festive celebration. A detail that perhaps our esteemed hosts have conveniently forgotten to mention, or more accurately, have deliberately preferred to keep shrouded in the deepest secrecy, hidden from all but a very select few. My gaze swept across the bewildered faces, lingering briefly on Mr. Graham Davies, the business partner, who now looked distinctly uncomfortable, his eyes darting nervously between Mrs. Sterling and me. Mr. Sterling, his face already flushing, a dangerous crimson, the veins in his neck bulging, attempted to interrupt me, his voice harsh, laced with a desperate, authoritative command, a futile attempt to regain control. "Anna, sit down immediately. This is absolutely no time for your distasteful jokes. You have already quite clearly overstepped your designated bounds, and I will not tolerate this disrespect in my home." He rose slightly from his seat, his hand slamming down on the table with a loud thud, a clear threat in his posture, his eyes narrowed with menace, attempting to intimidate me into silence. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I stared back at him, unflinching, my gaze steady and unwavering. The last vestiges of fear had completely evaporated, utterly replaced by a cold, burning determination, an unyielding resolve that felt like a shield around my heart. "Jokes? No, Mr. Sterling," I countered, my voice resonating with an unexpected clarity and strength, cutting through his bluster. "This is not, by any stretch of the imagination, a joke. This, rather, is the unvarnished, inconvenient truth. And it's a truth that has been hidden for far too long." With a decisive, deliberate movement, my hand, though still trembling slightly, moved with unwavering purpose. I pulled my phone from my small clutch bag. My fingers, steady despite the internal tremor, moved with precise purpose, navigating to the file Lucy had sent. With a quick tap, I wirelessly connected it to the enormous, state-of-the-art flat screen. Television prominently displayed in the living room, a colossal screen that usually served as a canvas for the family's lavish vacation slides, glossy images of exotic beaches and ski slopes, or projected images of their priceless, expansive art collection. The image that instantly filled the massive screen, replacing a serene landscape of the Alps, was clear, stark, and utterly undeniable. It was one of Lucy Watson's meticulously prepared documents, a damning bank statement displaying glaringly discrepant values, accompanied by a series of highly incriminating emails exchanged with various offshore lawyers discussing clandestine accounts, illicit fund transfers, and carefully orchestrated accounting adjustments. The text was small, but with a pinch-to-zoom function, it became immediately legible to anyone truly paying attention, to anyone brave enough to look. Gasps filled the room, a collective intake of breath. "This, Mr. Sterling," I continued, my voice now gaining an almost alarming strength and resonance, filling the stunned silence of the room, each word a hammer blow against their carefully constructed lies, "is but a small, carefully selected sample of your much-vaunted sacrifices. These meticulously detailed documents, which I was, shall we say, lucky enough to obtain from someone who worked diligently for you for over 2 decades, someone who, utterly exhausted by years of exploitation and disrespect, ultimately decided that the unvarnished truth deserved to finally come to light, to shine a blinding light on the darkness. These documents unequivocally show that your immense fortune is not, in fact, the glorious result of unwavering honesty and relentless hard work, as you so grandiosely, so arrogantly claim. On the contrary, it is in reality a colossal mountain of concealed debts, an intricately woven, complex scheme of systematic tax fraud, a brazen pattern of diverting substantial funds from various social projects that were supposedly sponsored by your ostensibly philanthropic family foundation, thereby stealing from those most in need, and a sprawling network of shadowy shell companies meticulously created for the sole purpose of laundering illicit money. Your esteemed company, Sterling Holdings, the very entity you boast about with such unbridled arrogance, is, to be brutally honest, teetering precariously on the very brink of utter bankruptcy, sustained solely by a fragile edifice of lies, rampant illegalities, and a meticulously constructed network of systemic bribes. The immense wealth you so ostentatiously flaunt, the very foundation of your revered social standing, is, in essence, built on a precarious house of cards, one that is now, as we speak, poised to dramatically collapse at any given moment, mercilessly revealing the rotten, corrupt core that has, for so long, sustained it, hidden beneath the glittering facade. The room was plunged into an utterly complete and astonishing silence. The very air itself seemed to have been violently sucked out, leaving every single person breathless, gasping for a reaction, for an explanation. The faces of the assembled guests, moments ago jovial and affected, were now eerily pale, utterly shocked. Some gaped openly, their mouths agape in disbelief, while others instinctively covered their mouths with trembling hands, their eyes wide with horror at the public spectacle, at the magnitude of the revelations. A few, the more cynical or perhaps the more malicious in the crowd, already wore faint, knowing smiles, their eyes glinting with a perverse satisfaction, savoring the unfolding drama, the spectacular downfall of the once impenetrable Sterlings. Mr. Sterling, his complexion turning a sickly, greenish white, remained frozen, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly, like a dying fish out of water, desperately trying to form some coherent excuse, some indignant denial, some furious retort to my accusations. But the words simply refused to come, strangled by the sheer weight of his exposure, by the undeniable evidence glaring from the screen. His jaw hung slack, a flicker of raw, unadulterated fear replacing the sneering contempt that had been his signature expression for me. He looked not like the formidable patriarch, but a desperate, cornered animal, stripped bare of all his power and pretense. Across from him, Mrs. Victoria Sterling, my mother-in-law, appeared to have aged 10 years in a matter of mere seconds. The vibrant, haughty glow that usually emanated from her had been extinguished, replaced by a ghastly pallor that made her seem almost translucent. She was utterly paralyzed, her perfectly manicured hands trembling uncontrollably, the magnificent, glittering jewels on her neck and wrists now seeming to mock her with their brilliance against her ashen skin, highlighting her profound distress. Her eyes, once so cold and calculating, were now grotesquely wide with pure, unadulterated terror, reflecting a dread that seeped into every corner of the room, a shared sense of impending doom. She, too, tried to compose herself, stammering. Incoherent accusations about absurd slanders and unfounded malicious attacks, her voice cracking with the strain, a shrill, desperate sound that bordered on hysteria. Her gaze, however, kept darting nervously towards the giant screen, still displaying the damning financial documents, then back to me, then to her husband, then finally to the horrified faces of their most influential guests. Her own carefully cultivated image was crumbling before her very eyes, exposed as nothing more than a meticulously woven lie, a fragile house of cards collapsing into dust. The very air around them seemed to crackle with their crumbling prestige, the silent sound of their carefully constructed reality imploding, echoing in the stunned, horrified room. "Slanders, Mrs. Sterling?" I retorted, my voice now devoid of any tremor, cutting through her frantic denials with a sad yet fiercely determined smile, my gaze unwavering, locked firmly on hers. "You speak of slanders. But what about the truth? What about the unwavering ethics you just toasted?" My voice gained a chilling edge. "Speaking of lies and profound dignity, since you are so exceptionally fond of tirelessly emphasizing family ethics and values to be honored, perhaps you could enlighten us all. Would you care to tell us a little, just a little, about the legacy that you claim to uphold? One that conspicuously includes a rather long-standing extraconjugal affair spanning several years with your own husband's younger business partner." The very same business partner, Mr. Graham Davies, who, if I am not mistaken, is sitting quite uncomfortably at that table now, exchanging nervous glances with you across the polished wood, desperately hoping I don't possess any visual proof of that particular secret as well. As I uttered those damning words, I deliberately extended my arm, my steady finger pointing directly at Mr. Graham Davies, a man noticeably younger than Mr. Sterling, whose handsome face was now a mask of absolute horror. Upon hearing his name, so brazenly spoken, he instantly turned an even more ghastly shade of pale. He abruptly dropped the delicate champagne glass he was holding, the crystal shattering with a sharp tink against the marble floor, its sound piercing the silence like a gunshot, and immediately tried to physically shrink into his opulent chair, his mouth hanging grotesquely open in absolute shock and abject terror. He was caught, exposed, utterly helpless. The room erupted in a fresh wave of gasps and whispers, the second, more personal blow landing with even greater force. This was not just financial ruin. This was a personal betrayal, exposed for all to see. The moment my finger pointed at Mr. Graham Davies, and the second, more personal, more devastating secret of Mrs. Victoria Sterling's affair with her husband's business partner was laid bare. The very fabric of the Christmas dinner, and indeed of the Sterling family's meticulously constructed reality, ripped apart. The grand hall, which only moments before had echoed with boisterous, though superficial, laughter and animated self-serving conversations, was now plunged into an awkward, suffocating, and heavy silence. It was a silence so profound, so utterly complete, that it seemed to absorb all other sound, leaving every single person breathless, literally gasping for a reaction, for an explanation, for some semblance of sanity in the face of such raw, public exposure. The collective shock was a palpable, almost physical force, pressing down on everyone present, making the air thick and difficult to breathe. The faces of the assembled guests, moments ago jovial and affected, their expressions carefully curated for the social occasion, were now eerily pale, utterly stunned into disbelief. Some gaped openly, their mouths agape in disbelief, their eyes wide and unblinking, while others instinctively covered their mouths with trembling hands, their gazes darting wildly between the Sterlings, Mr. Davies, and then back to me, their eyes wide with horror at the public spectacle, at the sheer, audacious magnitude of the revelations. A few, the more cynical, or perhaps the more malicious in the crowd, those who had always secretly harbored resentment or jealousy towards the Sterling's unassailable position, already wore faint, knowing smiles, their eyes glinting with a perverse satisfaction, savoring the unfolding drama, the spectacular downfall of the once impenetrable Sterling dynasty. The meticulously crafted masks of perfection that Mr. and Mrs. Sterling had worn for decades didn't just crack under the immense pressure, they shattered there, before everyone, in full, horrifying view, into a million irrecoverable pieces, revealing the profound ugliness and moral rot that had festered beneath their glittering veneer. The public humiliation they had so cruelly orchestrated for me had now, with terrifying precision, turned against them, backfiring with a brutal, undeniably public and utterly irrevocable force. The Sterling family's Christmas dinner would never, ever be the same again. The carefully constructed dynasty was, at that very moment, beginning its irreversible, spectacular collapse, spiraling into an abyss of public disgrace. Mr. Alastair Sterling, my father-in-law, remained frozen in his chair, a figure of pathetic, bewildered shock. His once imposing posture had completely crumpled, his broad shoulders slumped, and his face, previously a canvas of arrogance and self-satisfaction, was now a sickly greenish white, a ghastly hue that spoke volumes of his internal turmoil. His eyes, once sharp, commanding and dismissive, were now grotesquely wide, dilated with pure, unadulterated dread, reflecting the utter collapse of his carefully constructed world, his entire identity built on lies. He started to gape, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly, like a dying fish out of water, desperately trying to form some coherent excuse, some indignant denial, some furious, authoritative retort to my accusations. But the words simply refused to come, strangled by the sheer weight of his exposure, by the undeniable evidence glaring from the screen, by the collective gasp of his astonished guests. His jaw hung slack, a flicker of raw, unadulterated fear, replacing the sneering contempt that had been his signature expression for me. He looked not like the formidable patriarch, the titan of industry he purported to be, but a desperate, cornered animal, stripped bare of all his power and pretense, his false dignity evaporating like smoke. Across from him, Mrs. Victoria Sterling, my mother-in-law, a woman whose every move was usually calculated for maximum impact, appeared to have aged 10 years in a matter of mere seconds. The vibrant, haughty glow that usually emanated from her, her aura of untouchable elegance, had been completely extinguished, replaced by a ghastly pallor that made her seem almost translucent, frail. She was utterly paralyzed, her perfectly manicured hands trembling uncontrollably, the magnificent, glittering jewels on her neck and wrists now seeming to mock her with their brilliance against her ashen skin, highlighting her profound distress, her exquisite dress now just an ironic costume for her public downfall. Her eyes, once so cold, calculating, and disdainful, were now grotesquely wide with pure, unadulterated terror, reflecting a dread that seeped into every corner of the room, a shared sense of impending doom for their entire carefully cultivated existence. She, too, tried desperately to compose herself, her voice a desperate cracking sound, stammering incoherent accusations about absurd slanders and unfounded malicious attacks. Her words devoid of conviction, bordering on hysteria. Her gaze, however, kept darting nervously towards the giant screen, still displaying the damning financial documents, then back to me, then to her husband, then finally to the horrified, incredulous faces of their most influential guests. Her own carefully cultivated image, her entire persona as a pillar of society, was crumbling before her very eyes, exposed as nothing more than a meticulously woven lie, a fragile house of cards collapsing into dust. The very air around them seemed to crackle with their crumbling prestige, the silent sound of their carefully constructed reality imploding, echoing in the stunned, horrified room. Mr. Graham Davies, the younger business partner and Mrs. Sterling's now exposed lover, had, true to his cowardly nature, vanished. One moment he was shrinking into his seat, attempting to become invisible beneath the table. The next, he was gone, slipped away like a phantom, probably through a side door or discreetly out of the room, hoping to escape the unfolding disaster and the furious, incandescent gaze of Mr. Sterling. His hasty, ignominious exit only served to confirm the devastating truth of my accusations, a silent, damning admission that needed no words, no further explanation. His absence was, in itself, a powerful, irrefutable confession, sealing Mrs. Sterling's fate even further. The whispers intensified, now laced with explicit details of the affair, a salacious layer added to the financial ruin. The general murmur among the guests began to swell, slowly at first, then rapidly escalating into a cacophony of whispers and exclamations that threatened to overwhelm the room. It wasn't the polite, hushed chatter of a refined gathering anymore. It was the raw, unbridled sound of scandal erupting, of reputations being shredded in real time. "Fraud?" came a shocked voice. "Tax evasion? I always suspected something." Another added, "An affair, really, with Davies. How utterly scandalous." "And diverting funds from charity projects. That's just beyond the pale." The words, previously unspoken, now flew around the room, tinged with a potent mixture of shock, schadenfreude, a delicious pleasure at another's misfortune, and outright, voyeuristic fascination. People who had once fawned over the Sterlings, vying for their attention and approval, now looked at them with a mixture of pity, disgust, and a rapidly dawning realization that they, too, had been part of this grand illusion, a part of the audience for this elaborate deceit. Their faces reflected the unraveling of an illusion they had all, to some degree, bought into and benefited from, some perhaps even having suspicions they had chosen to ignore. Some pulled out their own phones, not to capture the moment on video, though I'm sure many wished they could, but perhaps to discreetly check news feeds for any breaking stories, or to quietly text their own confidants, eager to spread the sensational news to their respective social circles, ensuring the scandal would not remain confined within these walls. The dominoes had begun to fall, one by one, with increasing speed and force, and there was no stopping them now. The Sterlings' once tightly controlled narrative was spiraling into utter chaos. Lucas, who had remained frozen beside me throughout my shocking declaration, his posture rigid with a mixture of disbelief and growing understanding, finally stirred. His initial shock was still evident, etched on his handsome features, but a complex mix of emotions began to flicker in his eyes. Profound sadness for his parents, yes, a heavy sorrow for the tarnished family name he once held dear, but also a growing understanding of the depths of their deceit, a dawning realization of the truth he had perhaps willfully ignored or been shielded from. And then, to my profound surprise, an unmistakable glimmer of admiration for my courage, for my unwavering stand, shone through the sorrow. He slowly, deliberately rose from his seat, his gaze fixed first on me, then sweeping across the stunned faces of his parents, then back to me, making his choice clear. He stepped closer, his hand reaching out, and for the utter astonishment of every single person in that now stifled room, he firmly took my hand. There were no immediate words exchanged. Between us, not a single spoken phrase, but that simple, powerful gesture spoke more eloquently than any elaborate speech ever could. It was an unequivocal public reaffirmation of his unwavering choice, of his profound loyalty to me, Anna Miller, in a moment when everything his once unassailable family represented was not merely crumbling, but spectacularly imploding before their very eyes. His grip was steady, firm, a silent anchor in the swirling chaos, a powerful declaration of solidarity that resonated deep within my soul, a promise of a future unburdened by their lies. It was Lucas choosing truth over legacy, love over pretense. I didn't wait for more reactions, for more desperate attempts at denial, for further frantic discussions to erupt from the now fractured assembly. My purpose had been served. There was. Quite simply, nothing left to say, nothing more to explain, no justification needed. My message had been delivered with crystal clarity, with undeniable force, and it had landed with a resounding impact that would be felt for years to come, a seismic shock that would irrevocably redefine the sterling name in the annals of this city's elite. With my head held high, my spine ramrod straight, and without a single, lingering pang of remorse for what I had done was, I knew, undeniably just, a necessary act of self-preservation and truth, I began to slowly, deliberately, move in the direction of the grand, imposing main door. Each of my steps, though measured and calm, echoed with a profound significance in the now reverberating silence of the hall, a powerful, almost triumphant sound that to my ears was the sweet, liberating melody of long overdue freedom. The collective gazes of the assembled guests, a throng of high society onlookers, remained fixed on me, following my every movement as if I were leading a procession. But now, those gazes were no longer filled with the familiar disdain, the veiled contempt, or the cold judgment I had endured for so long. Instead, they were filled with a complex blend of profound surprise, unadulterated shock, and, perhaps, most surprisingly, a newfound, undeniable respect. I was no longer merely the poor Anna, the insignificant outsider, the embarrassing interloper. I was, in that moment, the formidable woman who had dared to expose the unvarnished truth, the unexpected force who had, with a single decisive blow, brought down the seemingly invincible giants. As I passed Lucas, who continued to stand steadfastly by my side, his presence a shield, he simply squeezed my hand again, his silent reassurance a powerful balm to my still-pounding heart, and accompanied me, without uttering a single word, towards the imposing exit. The biting cold of the Christmas night that awaited us outside, a stark contrast to the stifling, overheated tension and moral corruption of the mansion, was, for me, a truly welcome relief, a purifying, invigorating breeze after so much heavy, suffocating, and morally corrupted air. It felt like shedding a heavy cloak of pretense. We left the sterling mansion behind, its once majestic facade now irrevocably tarnished, its grandeur now hollow and meaningless. The cacophony of hushed, incredulous conversations and frantic whispers began to violently erupt and echo once more within its grand walls as the guests processed what they had just witnessed. While the house itself, once an impregnable symbol of unassailable power and prestige, now seemed to have been indelibly marked by the fresh, stinging stain of infamy. Its very stones seemed to absorb the shame. The night outside was a crisp, clear winter's canvas, dotted with countless stars that seemed to twinkle with a newfound intensity, reflecting a vast, indifferent universe that cared little for human deceit. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, a raw, honest scent that was a welcome change from the cloying perfumes and roasted meats inside the mansion. Lucas opened the car door for me, his movements tender and deliberate, a small act of kindness that felt monumental after the emotional battle we had just endured. I slid into the passenger seat, feeling a profound sense of lightness, a shedding of an immense burden I hadn't realized I had been carrying for so long, a weight that had silently pressed upon my spirit. The weight of their disdain, their constant need to diminish me, had been a silent, insidious pressure, an invisible cage, and now it was gone, replaced by an intoxicating, exhilarating sense of liberation, a freedom I had earned. Lucas got into the driver's seat, but instead of immediately starting the engine, he turned to me, his profile silhouetted against the dim glow of the dashboard lights. His hand reached out again, gently cupping my cheek, his touch reassuring. His eyes, usually so vibrant and full of life, were now tinged with a deep, sorrowful reflection, a genuine grief for the shattered illusions of his past, but also with an unwavering strength that I had come to love, a strength that had been rekindled in the crucible of that evening's truth. "Anna," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, raw with emotion. I had no idea it was this bad. About my father. About the fraud and my mother." He trailed off, shaking his head slowly, the weight of the revelations settling heavily upon him, forcing a painful, inescapable reevaluation of his entire upbringing, of his entire family's legacy. His parents, the figures of authority, of perfection, of unyielding moral rectitude he had always struggled to please, to live up to, were now exposed as deeply flawed, morally bankrupt individuals, their carefully constructed personas shattered beyond any hope of repair. The idealized image he had clung to, even as he quietly defied their will, was obliterated, replaced by a harsh, undeniable reality. "I know it's a lot, Lucas," I said softly, my thumb tracing gentle patterns on the back of his hand, offering what comfort I could. "And I'm so sorry you had to find out this way. Believe me, I didn't want to cause you pain. My intention was never to hurt you. But they left me no choice. They pushed me too far, for too long. Their cruelty became unbearable." A single tear finally escaped my eye, tracing a path down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness or regret. For my actions, no, not for the truth. It was a tear of the sheer emotional exhaustion from years of silent endurance, of suppressed anger, and the intense, almost unbearable pressure of the past hour, of finally speaking truth to power. It was a cathartic tear, washing away the bitter residue of their cruelty, cleansing me of their poison. He squeezed my hand tighter, his grip unwavering. "No, Anna, don't apologize. Not to me. You did what you had to do, what was right, what I should have done a long time ago, if I'm being truly honest with myself, if I had the courage. I never had the courage. I always hoped I could make them see, make them change, make them accept you, make them be decent, genuinely good people. But they never would have. They only care about appearances, about their own selfish desires, about maintaining their carefully curated illusion, no matter the cost, no matter who they hurt." His voice was heavy with profound regret, the bitter realization of his own unwitting complicity in their silence and their deceit dawning on him like a cold, hard dawn, illuminating the dark corners of his past. He had always been the gentle, diplomatic son, trying to mediate, trying to soften the blows, trying to keep the peace at all costs, but never truly challenging the rotting core of their corruption. Tonight, that changed irrevocably. My courage, my unwavering demand for truth, had ignited something profound in him, a spark of his own nascent strength, a renewed commitment to integrity that he had always possessed but had allowed to be dormant under his parents' oppressive thumb. It was a shared awakening, a painful but necessary step towards genuine freedom. We sat there in a profound, comfortable silence for a while, the soft hum of the idling Bentley engine a quiet counterpoint to the turmoil within us, a shared moment of processing and profound shift. I looked back at the mansion one last time, now appearing less like a grand, imposing estate and more like a crumbling, haunted fortress, its myriad lights still blazing, but its facade irrevocably cracked, its grandeur now hollow and meaningless. The faint sounds of hushed, agitated voices could still be heard even from a distance, the once festive party undoubtedly having dissolved into utter chaos, frantic recriminations, and desperate, futile damage control. But their frantic efforts would be in vain. The truth, once unleashed into the public sphere, could not and would not be contained. It would spread like wildfire, consuming all in its path, leaving nothing but scorched earth behind. That night, and in the turbulent, relentless weeks and months that followed, the scandalous unraveling of the Sterling Empire spread like an uncontrollable wildfire across the entire city and beyond. The local newspapers, which had for so long lavished praise on their supposed philanthropic endeavors and their shrewd visionary business acumen, now prominently featured scathing headlines detailing the intensifying criminal investigations into widespread tax fraud, money laundering, and the sordid public speculations surrounding Mrs. Sterling's blatant, long-standing infidelity. The colossal fortune they had so ostentatiously flaunted, the very bedrock of their social standing, was quickly revealed to be nothing more than a flimsy facade, a meticulously constructed illusion, and their once imposing business empire. A precarious house of cards that spectacularly collapsed with the gentlest breeze of inconvenient truth. The gilded doors of the exclusive social circles they had so meticulously cultivated and so desperately valued slammed shut in their faces, unequivocally, and the carefully curated image of unblemished perfection they had diligently cultivated, for decades, shattered into a million irreconcilable, irreparable pieces. They lost not merely their pristine reputation, they lost the very essence of who they had deluded themselves into believing they were, their carefully constructed identities obliterated by the harsh, unforgiving glare of public exposure. Sue. Fallout was swift, comprehensive, and brutally unforgiving. Mr. Sterling faced a barrage of protracted legal battles, his once powerful companies undergoing forensic audits that unearthed layer upon layer of intricate deceit, fraudulent transactions, and illicit dealings. The legal fees alone began to rapidly deplete their actual, remaining legitimate assets. Mrs. Sterling, once the undisputed queen of her social circles, found herself utterly isolated, a pariah, completely ostracized by the very women she had once reigned over. Her affair became a juicy, delectable scandal whispered about in every salon, country club, and hushed conversation across the city, her name a byword for hypocrisy and infidelity. Their immense wealth, once seemingly boundless and limitless, began to rapidly dwindle as bank accounts were frozen, properties seized, and countless lawsuits mounted against them, not just from creditors, but from former employees and even some of the charities whose funds Mr. Sterling had diverted. The mansion itself, once a shimmering symbol of their seemingly untouchable power, became a stark, empty monument to their public disgrace, a constant, silent reminder of their spectacular fall from grace. For Lucas, it was a profoundly painful, yet ultimately necessary, severance. He had to distance himself, not just physically, but emotionally, from the toxic, rotting legacy of his parents. It was an incredibly difficult decision, fraught with the immense emotional complexities of familial ties and deeply ingrained expectations. But it was one he knew, with unwavering certainty, he had to make for his own intrinsic integrity, for his peace of mind, and for our shared future together, a future built on honesty and authentic values. He found his own path, independent of their ill-gotten gains, pursuing his passions with a clear conscience, finally free from the shadow of their expectations. For me, Anna, that Christmas night was not merely a disastrous dinner, it was a profound turning point, a definitive watershed moment in my life's narrative. It was the moment I finally, truly freed myself from an insidious burden I hadn't even consciously realized how immensely it weighed upon my spirit, subtly eroding my self-worth, dimming my light. It was the day I unequivocally regained my voice, reaffirmed my inherent dignity, and solidified the unwavering certainty that true strength, lasting power, resides not in the fleeting allure of money or the superficial prestige of social position, but in the unyielding force of integrity, the quiet power of self-respect, and the profound, transformative courage to fiercely defend the truth, even when that truth is profoundly inconvenient, even when it threatens to shatter the comfortable illusions of others. The quiet, resolute act of standing up for myself, of exposing their rot, had not only freed me, but had also, inadvertently, set Lucas free from a suffocating gilded cage of expectations and lies. It was a liberation, a profound rebirth, a new beginning for both of us, a chance to build a life on foundations of honesty. We built our own life, Lucas and I, brick by honest brick, rooted in values that truly mattered. Our home might not be a mansion, but it is filled with genuine warmth, heartfelt laughter, and an authenticity that the sterling mansion, for all its opulence, could never truly possess. We found our happiness in shared dreams, in mutual respect, and in a love that had not only endured the storm, but had grown exponentially stronger amidst its fury, a love forged in the fire of truth. That Christmas, it wasn't just a holiday. It was the start of our true freedom, our authentic lives, unburdened by the pretense and cruelty of others. If this story touched you in any way, and if you have personally felt the weight of humiliation or the liberating power of truth, I invite you to join our community. Your experience, your voice matters here, and together, we can show that integrity always wins. Subscribe to the channel right now so you don't miss any inspiring, true stories like this one. Hit that bell icon to be notified every time a new video drops. Give a like if you believe that truth always, eventually prevails, no matter how deeply hidden or fiercely guarded. And if you know someone who needs to hear this powerful message of resilience and justice, someone who might be struggling with their own silent battles, please share this video with them. And now, the most important question for you, our amazing audience, the heart of our community. Have you ever been deeply humiliated by someone living a life of pretense, someone who built their world on lies and false appearances? What did you do in that situation? How did you reclaim your dignity and find your path forward? Share your honest, heartfelt experiences in the comments section below. Your story might be the next to inspire someone, to give them the courage they need to stand up for themselves. Let's build a supportive community where dignity, truth, and resilience are always celebrated and uplifted. Thank you for listening and for being a part of this journey.